Good Tuesday morning, everyone. Skylar Callan here with another episode of Between the Ears. And today we're going to talk more about spring football, a little about what needs to happen, not only this Saturday at the spring game, but this offseason moving into the fall with a particular position. And that is, of course, you guessed it, the quarterbacks. Before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button on our YouTube page at Mountaineers Now. Give us a thumbs up. And then go over to X and follow us at that same handle as well. We do shows Monday through Friday. As of now, every morning we've got something up for you. So let's go ahead and get cooking with this one here. Garrett Greene is going to be the starting quarterback. That's not a shocker, right? Nicco Marchiol is going to be quarterback number 2. That is also not a shocker. I think the narrative is about this quarterback room, and it's very accurate, is that this is basically a year for Nico to kind of continue to develop, but sit and learn, because this thing is going to be handed to him next season. And that sounds, in theory, terrific. If you can have a perfect scenario where Garrett goes out there in his last year and wins you, let's say 9 or 10 games, and then you hand it over to Nico, and it's a flawless transition. It's seamless. It looks as it should, and you win 9 or 10 games again. Now you're cooking. You got something here. You can get on a little bit of a roll for the first time since Neil Brown's been on the job. What I think needs to happen this year, 2 things, and one probably sounds more realistic than the other, but Nicco Marchiol, he needs to push Garrett Greene. I'm not saying he needs to surpass him. I'm not saying that he needs to be neck and neck with him, but he needs to push Garrett Greene when it comes to fall. Again, this is not for the starting job, but he needs to push in the fact that when you watch those 2 guys practice every day in fall camp, you need to see some areas of Nico's game that you look and say, well, dang, he could do that pretty well. He might be doing this a little bit better than Garrett. Now, it might not be every area, and it's probably not going to be every area. Garrett's the starter for a reason. But if Nico can make that leap from where he is now until fall and truly push Garrett to where it's making Garrett better, that is the number one thing that needs to happen. And it's probably already happening now, if we're being honest. We just need to see that Nico is just not, taking this next year, soaking everything in and then starting to apply that next spring. It needs to happen now. Because as we saw last year, injuries do happen. Backup quarterbacks get into games, and sometimes you might need to win a game or 2, which Nico did. But if that happens again this year, Nico's going to have a little bit more responsibility on his plate. It's not going to be just turn the ball, hand it off, turn the ball, hand it off, throw, a little 5-yard pass, turn around, hand the ball off. It's not going to be that. 2 reasons. Well, and that's going to lead me in my next point here. Sean Boyle has to make that push. He's got to push Nicco Marchiol. And notice how I'm very careful with my words here. I'm not saying compete. I'm not saying that they've got to overcome or leapfrog over one or the other, but push. And by push, I literally quite figuratively mean push. He needs to push Nico up into a better level, just as Nico needs to push Garrett into another level. When you get those two guys pushing, that ripple effect happens. Nico or Garrett's better, makes Garrett better. Sean's obviously improved that. And that's where it starts, Sean Boyle, technically. Because if that does happen, where you get in that situation where Garrett's, going to miss a game, where he misses, 2 quarters or something crazy happens and he's hurt, you want to turn to Nico and feel like you can kind of open up the playbook a little bit more. But you can't really feel good about doing that if you don't feel good about Sean Boyle. You can, but you're rolling the dice and risking what could happen if Nico gets hurt. That's why it's so important for this whole quarterback room in general to take a step to push each other. Sean Boyle has got to push Nicco Marchiol. That gap between Nico and Sean needs to go like this. That gap between Garrett and Nico needs to go like this. That's all I'm saying. Again, Garrett, Nico, it doesn't need to go Nico here to over here or Nico here to here. It's just gotta shrink. And it's the same thing with Sean to Nico. Because if Nico does get in the game, they've got to feel comfortable with doing some of the same stuff that they were doing with Garrett in terms of the run game, in terms of, scrambling and taking shots downfield, which may mean hanging in the pocket longer. But all that equates to, if something were to happen to Nico, you've got to feel good about Sean Boyle. And I think that's the one area of this team that no one really talks about, because it's just kind of like this assumption, right, that, Garrett's going to go out there, he's going to play, all 12, 13 games, and everything's going to be all hunky-dory. Well, that's the perfect world, and we don't live in a perfect world. Things happen all the time. And I'm not going to, sit here and necessarily jinx anything, but there's teams that have gone into a season with extremely high expectations. They suffer a major injury. It doesn't even have to be at the quarterback spot, and it derails their whole plan. Now they got to pivot. This is why Nico and his development is huge. Now, everything that we've heard from Neil Brown, everything that we've heard from Tyler Allen, new quarterbacks coach, for those that don't know, is positive. He's making those strides. He's doing things now that he wasn't doing a year ago. He's not staring at receivers. He's understanding defenses a lot better. He understands the picture. He's getting the ball out. And that's great. Can it translate? I think it can. The kid is an absolute gamer. I'm not doubting Nico. I've never doubted Nico and his ability. He's always had the talent. It's just that jump from high school to college at the quarterback spot is one of the toughest. And I know a lot of people say offensive line, and I can't even argue with that. But that jump from high school to college with the quarterback spot is huge. There's so much that goes into it. And like Tyler Allen said, when he was in high school, he was just the best player on the field. He looked at a certain player that, he wanted to throw the ball to, and that's where the ball went. Can't do that at this level. And he learned that last year in the games against Pitt, Texas Tech, and so on. You've got to understand the picture, what the defense is presenting you. Take what they give you. And at this level too, you've got to throw guys open. At the high school level, you probably just have better athletes, and as soon as they start their route, boom, they're open. Not here. You've got to get those guys to a spot where you feel like they have good leverage, and then all of a sudden you just throw it to a spot that they should be at in theory and throw them open. And I'm telling you, that is the big thing for me. I like this team. I really do. I think if they're healthy, I think West Virginia can compete for the Big 12. Now, will that go all the way up until the final week of the season? I don't know about that. We'll see. There's a lot of time between now and in the start of the season for me to make that assumption or evaluation, but this is a team that can compete. They've got depth on both sides. However, the most important position on the field is quarterback. We know what Garrett can do, but if he's feeling Nico taking strides, he's never going to, he knows his job's never threatened, right? I mean, we would assume, but if Nico makes that big of a jump from where he is now to the fall, and again, it's more of a theoretical thing. Nico's not going to leapfrog Garrett Greene, but if Garrett sees and senses that Nico is steadily creeping up on him in terms of, that gap that was this big at one point and is now starting to become like this, it's going to make Garrett lock in even more. It's going to make him dial in even more. And that is what you need to have happen. Because, again, worst case scenario, something happens to Garrett, you got to be able to throw Nico in there. But again, it all goes down to Sean Boyle as well. So, yes, it's not a perfect world where your starting quarterback's going to play all 13 games. It's also not a perfect world where you're going to have three, quarterbacks on your roster that are capable of going in there and probably winning you a game or two. But you need to see that develop. You need to see things moving along. You need to see the gaps shrink. And I think that, to me, is one of the biggest parts of this offseason. Even if you don't quite get there with Sean, and again, here's the thing with Sean. He doesn't have to be in a spot where he's necessarily game ready, right? He needs to probably be somewhere close, or at least in the same ballpark, the same stratosphere to where Nico was a year ago. To where if he has to come in against Pitt or Texas Tech, he can do enough to get you by and still potentially win a game. He doesn't need to be in a spot where Nico is now. But for Nico, he's got to be in a spot where if he's going into the game, nothing changes. There's no drop-off. It's plug and play. And I think it could be. Again, the kid is immensely talented. He's incredibly smart. He's understanding how to watch film at this level now, which, again, Coach Allen talked about. That's huge. And the kid, he's only going to get better. And that's why this is setting up to be the perfect situation for West Virginia. I talked about it in the past. Like it would be great, for Neil Brown if he could get another, 9-10 win season from Garrett and say, here you go, Nico. Look at this situation we just handed you. In your first year as a starter, you're coming off 2 years in which the team won 9+ games. It'd be great. So I'm interested to see what Nico looks like on Saturday. I really, really am. I'm also interested to see what Garrett looks like in his progression, Sean Boyle, all the quarterbacks. I just think it's an area of the roster that no one really talks about because everyone just assumes Garrett's going to be there every single week. And hopefully that's the case, but you got to be prepared. And I'm ready to see where those two backups are. And again, spring game, it's one data point on the board, so it's not like it's the end-all be-all for those two guys. It's not the final judgment before going into the 2024 season, but it gives you somewhat of a painted picture of where they're at. So that'll do it for me here today. Make sure, again, to hit that subscribe button on YouTube at Mountaineers Now. Give us a thumbs up. Hit us up on X at the same handle. You can follow me at Callahan_. We'll be back here tomorrow morning for another episode. Again, Monday through Friday here on Between the Ears. Until then, take care.